This is episode 32, Artists and Healers.
When we were born, we knew things. When we were born, we knew things. Connection was our start point. My beauty is inherited from everything around me. And it's generated from everything inside of me. I move like a silky on the night sea in order to reach home over and over. An endless journey with multiple stop points. The place between sea and sky is my home. The place between sea and sky is my home. As I disembark on this journey, I gain new wisdom, remember old knowledge, seed new relationships, and weave new life. Through my bones, and the voice of my body. This body has known things since before my time. This body has known things since before my time. This soul is the water. This soul is the land. This soul is the wind. It is the wind. And the mountains open up. This soul feels the cracks. It feels the cracks and knows it is time to come home.
Claire, welcome to the Language of Creativity podcast.
Thank you, Stephen.
So glad to have you here.
Yeah, I'm really, really excited to be here.
Oh my gosh. We were talking a little bit before the episode about impending life changes, and then I was listening to your poem and your sound healing, and it gave me goosebumps. I think you have your answer.
Well, you might have to elaborate on that. But it definitely changes things.
Wind.
Well, yeah, I am the wind.
I am this soul.
Exactly.
Has to make new connections.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, skip ahead to the beginning again.
Skip ahead to the beginning.
Claire is a sound healer, an energy worker, and also a polymath. We've done a little bit of talking as we met through the Buckminster Fuller Institute and the Design Science Studio.
Well, to a degree. So I'm not in their program through various serendipities, of course.
Yeah.
When they were doing their, I believe it's an annual vision train that two people initiated and host. A friend of mine called Mark Smith, he himself is an artist. He kind of brought me into it. And before I knew it, I was all over the place offering presentations and conversations, really, and sound healings
Mm.
into this dynamic group of people who have been studying at the Buckminster Fuller Institute for, I believe it's a little under a year is the length of the program, if I'm remembering that right.
How did you find the Buckminster Fuller Institute?
So really, to find the beginning of anything is always an interesting challenge, because once you start looking at the threads that are weaving, it's like, well, which thread do I speak to first? So I've lived in the Bay Area for a long time, the San Francisco Bay Area, 30 years. And I'm very close to the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and I have had conversations with Amanda Ravenhill, who was one of the people holding it, really, until quite recently, I believe. And because the Bay is so rife with innovation and innovative thinking, especially around healing social systems and expanding our consciousness, I can't help but meet interesting people all the time and having these great conversations. So I had already a relationship with her and thereby with the Institute. And in another trajectory, I had seen a solo performance that someone did as Buckminster Fuller.
Oh.
At a place called The Cell in San Francisco. I have no idea if it still exists even.
Mm-hmm.
So there was that. Plus, after a number of years of doing an undergrad in sort of fine art and humanities, I ended up at CIIS. And
California Institute
the California Institute.
Integrative Studies.
Yeah, Integral.
Yeah.
Integral Studies. And during that year-long program, where you can basically validate your life by turning it into coherent stories and thereby getting credits for it, people like myself who tend to butterfly around could actually finish their degrees. And that's what I was doing there.
That's brilliant.
It is brilliant.
That's brilliant.
It's a wonderful program.
My sister could have used that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that a lot of people really don't know. Like,
yeah.
But I want to do multiple things.
Exactly. And there's not enough of that in the world validating us. So yeah, I'm already going off on a trajectory.
That's okay. This is my show, and it's all about tangenting. And then they'll all weave together, and everybody will be like,
okay, good.
There's two of us now in the same room. So just warning alert, there's going to be tangent.
Fractal alert.
Yes.
So where I was going to go was straight into critiquing, maybe even attacking the way our social systems are organized, because they're not based on living systems awareness. And that means that as human beings, we are not in our living systemness invited to be the whole of who we are. We're asked to separate elements of ourselves out.
Yes.
Right? And then just show up as a little rational being, and only a little rational being. And God forbid we bring in the sensory, the emotional, the intuitive. And depending on which culture you grow up in, and within that culture, which gender you are, what class you are, how you speak, like all these different things affect your hierarchy. And thereby the audibility of your own voice.
Yes.
And that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, I just think about the divide between thinker and feeler. It's like we're this bifurcation in our society of this rationalism that's brought us very good things. But I remember specifically when my sister was at the age where you go to college and she hated school. And it was this whole thing of like, she had worked herself into a pretzel about, but I should go to school, but I hate school and I've got to maybe I'll do fashion, this whole thing. And it was like, having gone through this myself in a different version of it, I was able to really sense that the issue was okay, you're a person who really validates your direction through how you feel about it. And that's super important to acknowledge. So when I acknowledged that for her, it was like it let the air out of the balloon, and suddenly it was like, okay, there's enough peace to decide. Where as long as there was this like cloud of rational thought that, well, this and this because that, and it was like just this tail chasing that was occurring because she's not naturally native to the rationalist part of operating. And
I completely
left brain,
understand.
right brain. And you and I have talked about this. You and I are both like balanced left brain, right brain. So the conversation we've had just been wild because it's like, oh, and this, and you know,
Yes.
like, but it goes from like scientific thought to like spirituality, and in a way that's so holistic and integrative. Exactly what you were talking about, of that idea of like, we've learned in society to separate out certain kinds of, like, I had to look up the institute that you studied at, and it was all about trying to bring in disciplines that could talk to each other. And
Yeah.
I feel like that's what's missing in our society, is everything is so like, oh, well, let's just study the brain, and oh, let's just study the circulatory system, and oh, well, maybe what you eat affects how your circulation's working, which affects if your brain's getting enough oxygen, because they're all a part of one human body, right?
Yeah. Well, and the thing that feeds into for me, ironic use of the word feed because of what I'm about to say, is when I listen to NPR, the public radio station, right, when I'm in the car, and which is the only time I listen to the radio, really. And they're talking about cuts to food at schools. And there's such an obsession around this idea that people are meant to work for things, that what's not taken into account is the systemic nature of being healthy and being able to learn. So if your brain and your body all develop based on the quality and amount of food you have access to.
Yeah, if your brain is hungry and calorie starved, it's in survival mode, and it's not in the part where we learn things about mathematics. It's like, where am I going to get my next meal? And I better cut off the most energy hungry part of the body is the brain. So let's not operate the brain so much so the rest of us can survive, so the brain doesn't die. Yeah, it's exactly, I mean, if you wanted to look at it from a rationalist perspective, it's highly irrational to think that you could cut that off. But for some reason, there is this idea of like worth coming from hard work, and this ignoring of, well, that's not the child's fault if the parents are in a circumstance where they can't provide for the child. And ultimately, I love the study that has to do with, well, first of all, my wife's a teacher, so absolutely 100% everything that you were talking about. And there was this study, and I think it was in Freakonomics, where they were talking about how they did the math on childhood preschool, and conservatives were backing it because financially, fiscally, it's cheaper than incarceration 18 years down the line. It is more economical for society to provide opportunities for children at a developmentally crucial stage, scientifically proven, than to let everybody just sort for themselves. And then you end up dealing with incarceration, healthcare issues, on and on and on, impacts to society that are a net drain on the economic side if you wanted to just make it a purely numbers-based thing, which it's not.
It isn't. I've been so bothered by the choices that I see us making as a species, and I have been for so many years, that I ended up trying to understand it, because I really wanted to understand what's happening. Why are we doing these things to the environment? Why are we okay with slavery of any kind, violence of any kind, violence that seems to be ramping up, if anything? And what is it? What's perpetuating that? So I wanted to understand that question. And so that whole exploration ended up being what's called dynamic emergence. And I wanted to understand the basis of irrationality, really, because my thought was, if, and we have to, I think, add if in our questions, if we want to survive, if that's an imperative drive within humans, then why would we be behaving in ways that threaten that? So obviously threatening the planet, which is our sustenance and source of survival, it would be irrational to kill and destroy the planet's ability to sustain us.
It'd be like burning your own house down.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
like sitting inside of it to see what happens. Like, who would do that?
Or not
Unless
even
you have a death
not
wish.
even looking at the house that's burning because you're counting money.
Right.
I mean, typically that's where the attention is, on money.
Right.
And even people with a lot of money, by comparison to others, are still living beyond or at the edge of what's affordable. So they make financial commitments that mean that they feel poor.
Right, right.
So that's a thought that I hadn't had. Someone else introduced that to me, who lives in Marin, where there is a lot of wealth. And I live in the East Bay of San Francisco, where there's a lot more political activism, really, for social equity and equality. But the thing I wanted to share specifically was that in trying to understand irrationality around survival, so this existential situation that we're in, what I discovered is that if you look at ways of knowing as being either rational, emotional, or sensory, and then, of course, that's all housed in this lovely not knowing, being very, very open to listening and imbibing information from larger spheres of reality, including intuition as the gateway for that communication, that in fact there's a law, and it's called the inversion theory. And the law states, funny,
I was going to ask you about this.
Yeah.
This was one of my favorite quotes that I discovered from you.
Yeah, that if any one way of being, either rational, emotional, or sensory, is not in balance or informed by the other two, it will and does become the inverse of itself. So if you think about it, you have to kind of deconstruct that a little bit. But if you think about it, so if we're behaving irrationally, that suggests that the rational is not, in fact, being supported by sensory or emotional.
Well, I'd like to back up for a second, because you're laying out the groundwork of this dynamic emergence that you've authored. And what I understand is that the rational, the emotional, and the sensory, those three things all exist within one body, within one person.
Yes.
And so the thing that I understood from your talk was that every person has a bias toward one of them.
Yeah, I think so.
So I'm an emotional bias. And maybe my brother is a rational bias. That's what we were talking about earlier with that sort of dichotomy between the two. But actually, there's a third, and it's sensory.
Yes.
Exactly. So that's why some people work better with their hands outdoors than, they do
or
in
the
office.
Healing arts.
Right? Yes, exactly.
Because it's not just physical. It's also about the capacity to translate subtle energy.
Yeah, so the bias innately is not bad. Every human has it. The point is that when the bias becomes so pronounced, you said when one way of knowing becomes isolated and no longer informed by the others, by the other two, at its most extreme, it becomes the inverse or the opposite of itself. So rationality actually becomes irrational.
Yes.
And so that made me think of our society's situation with masculinity.
Oh.
For example, in terms of archetypes, right? To protect becomes to impose.
Ooh.
Strength becomes fragility and easily offended. So people who have become strong, their egos are hurt so easily by something that a real strong person, it wouldn't matter what someone said. They know who they are. And so, that's just one example of something becoming its opposite. And
I'm really excited to hear you do an example, because it's like, oh my God, he's taking it in and he's thinking about it and applying it and seeing how it makes sense. So it's such a treat. It's like to hear it travel.
Something else is that when you said, why would people want violence or slavery? Yeah. The truth is not very many people actually want violence or slavery. I'm not going to say there aren't people who would get very excited about, I get to go bash shit up, right? But that's not what I'm talking about. What I think is it's exactly like you said, when it becomes irrational. It's like the book Predictably Irrational. I forget the author, but there's a book, you can pretty much look at these scenarios and these situations and these confluences of events that make you could predict what's going to happen in human behavior when these conditions are true. So here you are with inversion theory laying out a really important truth for our time, which is that when something gets to an extreme, it's now the inverse of itself, and it's creating the opposite of what we desire. So sometimes a desire for security creates scarcity.
You're right.
Like there was this church that we were visiting and their attendance is down. And so what they did was they started visioning, okay, what do we want to do as a church? How do we want to thrive as a church? And in thriving, it's going to attract more people, which is going to bring in more resources, and it's going to bring a healthier community. But as long as everybody goes into penny pinching and, can we shut the air conditioner off? Well, nobody's going to come if you shut the air conditioner off, if you live somewhere that's hot. And I think that's what drew me to the Buckminster Fuller Institute, was that kind of thinking. When I heard the quote, and you can say the quote better than I do, so please correct me, but Buckminster Fuller himself said that you don't change old systems by fighting against them. You create new systems that make the old ones obsolete.
That sounds accurate to me. And another way that he may have said that too at another time, perhaps, is that just create a better party that people will want to come to.
Yeah. I mean, if, we're not going to limit transportation and people's desires as humans to move around, but if we make better transportation and it's also better for the world and the society and the planet, then what are people going to use? I mean, it's still got to be practical. It's still got to be something attractive to people. And when those things come out, they change society. I mean, suddenly, and, it does sometimes take these mass events for these things to get adopted, like COVID and Zoom. I mean, we're able to do this. We didn't have to get on an airplane to have this talk. And I'm actually kind of cool with that. I really like doing them in person though. So it's like, that's never going to replace our need for in-person community, but maybe it's also going to help us appreciate the need for in-person community. And we're going to find also, in addition to Zoom and what you and I are doing and how we're sharing this with the world through a podcast, we might actually also then acknowledge the need for human connection and go to that in-person sound healing event that you have, or, have our neighbors over, or start to forge these communities, but we're able to pollinate the values and the vision that we're sharing and bring that into our own gatherings and our own in-person, and also the who we're being. You also talk about with dynamic emergence, how when two people get into a room together, they're fields affect one another.
Yes.
And they talk together. They create a new, it's like when you did your thing at the beginning that we listened to, the
Mountains Breathe.
Mountains Breathe.
Yeah.
You got your root note on your hurdy-gurdy or what
Shruti. It does sound, I love the hurdy-gurdy.
So you got the root and then you're playing that sixth.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I just sing that, people think that's the root. But if I go, then all of a sudden it's the difference between those two notes. It creates a whole vibe. It creates a feeling. It creates a pattern. And that pattern, if I start a song with, it's going to immediately feel a certain way. The rest of the song is set up like to say something. That sounds like that. Yeah. But if I start with a major third, or was that a fourth? See me a major third.
Actually, it was a fifth.
A fifth? Yeah. So I start with something more open, the possibilities are open. It's the same thing when we come at world problems with, frustration and, this is, it's a deadlock and nothing's going to happen. And I think that's a message that I want the world to know, is that we can't solve the problems at the level of frustration and deadlock, and this is never going to work, and we're all doomed, and all, that is just not, so what if we're doomed? We're actually not. if we could actually find the collective togetherness to do something, if we could find a way around. And that's what I love about that quote from Bucky. If you can literally don't spend 10 months being stuck in something that isn't working. Like, start fresh, start with something new, better. Envision the world you want and use that energy of positivity and that thought form of this is vibrating with what we really want to create, because that is ultimately affecting those three things. It's affecting what you called what was the layer around the three sense?
Well, it can be called the not knowing, and ajna. So a priest I know who is both Buddhist and Christian, he talks about the ajna, the third eye. And when he saw, here's a funny story. So those maps, the mind map of you or I, there are these three circles, right? Rational, emotional, and sensory. And then there's this circle that they're spheres that they sit inside, which is the not knowing. And then outside of that is another circle, so lots of circles. And that circle kind of has this dotted line around it. And the dotted line is a reference to I, for interface, so otherwise known as the ego in psychological talk. Mm-hmm. But for a long time, there was this circle that I didn't know the name of, and I showed this work to his name's Father Richard, and I showed him one of the maps because he loves to deconstruct things, and he looked at the knowing, rational, emotional, sensory, and this all comes from Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, simplified. Kind of smushed together in what I consider to be perhaps reasonable reference points.
This is not Richard Rohr, is it?
No.
Different Richard. Okay.
No. Mapplebeck Palmer, in case he doesn't mind his name being said. But he looked at this circle that didn't have a name, and he wasn't really referring to it specifically, but when I was leaving, he said, oh, don't forget the not knowing. And for me, suddenly, all these things landed, and I realized that this circle that had been there nameless for over a year, I knew it belonged there, but I didn't know what its function was. So I just left it there, trusting that at some point that would make sense to me. And then and this is the thing, see, dynamic emergence is described as the phenomena of novelty arising when two or more elements meet, novelty arising. And so because he and I were interfacing, right, and so we're having this lovely conversation, he said that in my presence, and no one else might have thought of it, but he did. And because I was hearing him, I could suddenly join these dots, and it's like this piece of the puzzle just landed in front of me and presented itself.
Yeah. That's why I love having these conversations.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. It's like there's a part of you that was already there because you knew that there was a circle, but you were just missing the specificity of it.
Yeah.
And here's this person who you probably know him, but you might only meet someone once, but they might catalyze something.
Absolutely. You don't have to know each other. You're right. Yeah. You don't have to know each other for that spark of inspiration or understanding to suddenly kind of reorient and make sense. And then you're off and running. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. And that's what humanity's emerging intelligence is doing.
Yeah.
I mean, now we have the internet where it's like these conversations have multiplied, and where you may not have found anyone to talk about this kind of stuff in your small town. Now you can connect to a podcast where, oh my gosh, there are other people who are like wondering the same, not knowing things that I am, but I have a feeling that there's a circle there. I just don't know what to call it. And then it's like these aha moments of like, connecting with something that's just been there all along, but you didn't know how to put it into words.
I think there's something very beautiful about, and I speak really as a healer and as a musician when I say this, about being able to listen with our senses, to listen with our intuition, and to really be very open and available. And in that sort of gentleness, I think, new things can present. And I think sometimes we're so busy that we can be utterly focused on a destination. And in order to be efficient, we'll shut all the doors on the corridor to get there. And in fact, when I used to teach at San Francisco State, I used to teach creativity and innovation.
Oh, cool.
I was in the College of Business, which is a bizarre place for me to have landed, really, with my background. But there I was, and I was teaching creativity and innovation to students on the management track. And one of the first things I would get them to do, I loved turning everything on its head with them, especially because they had just been told, jump through this hoop, now jump through this hoop. And all they wanted to know was how high and how often in order to get the A that I think I deserve.
Give me a formula.
Yeah, they wanted a formula. And so some part of me just likes to kind of mess with things like that and shake it up and see what happens. How does it land? You know, like the snow glow? Is that what it's called? The circular things you shake?
Right.
Yeah. So what I would do is get them to come outside because we had a lovely green campus, literally green with lawn. And it had pathways that crisscrossed to all the different buildings that were there for their studies. And so people typically were just racing down these pathways, head down, books under their arm, going to their next class. And what I had them do was take off their socks and shoes if they're willing, and to do the walking meditation that Thich Nhat Hanh made so well known around the world. And their only job was to notice what they noticed. That was it. And then, so I made them do that for 20 minutes. And they were like, 20 minutes? And then the instruction was, when I'll wave at you to come back, and no one is to talk, right? During this whole time, no talking. Then come back into the classroom and just write anything. Write what you noticed. Write what's in you right now, how you're feeling. How, you know, your personal space, anything at all. And then we'll talk about it. And so we used to start every semester with that. And oftentimes that ended being one of the favorite things that they did. But the thing that the most of them noticed was how busy everyone else was.
Oh, yeah.
They were like, gosh, everyone was just like rushing and no one was noticing. And what they noticed was the bird song, the sky, the trees, the feel of the grass underfoot. It all slowed down. They had to walk very slowly, heel to toe.
Well, because your feet aren't used to walking on bare earth.
I know.
Or bare
and some of them were kind of freaked out at the idea.
Yeah, it freaks me out. Like I try and earth every once in a while now. I kind of have to stand in one place because my feet are so sensitive, you know? But we've had this layer of rubber underneath us between the earth. And so we're desensitized in a sense.
Yes.
We're also sheltered in so many ways. We don't have to deal with the elements. Like in California, we don't even really know the seasons.
Yeah, I know. I miss the seasons. I really do. I look forward to some indication, but it's not as exaggerated as it is on the East Coast or perhaps further into Europe as well.
I had a funny thing happen. So just to ground in, okay, hypothetical business student. Oh, some people might say, what a waste of time. Why do you have to know this? They're all just going to go off and be hippies now and not actually run businesses. Well, I have a perfect example. Yesterday I had gone swimming and I had to fill up the pool with a little bit of water. And so I put the hose in and started filling it up. And I forgot to set a timer because I was busy like trying to prep for our interview today. Oh. And so I went and I, because I have my son at home, so I'm working from home and I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this. And, and then the kids got home, they wanted to play. And then my daughter wanted to go to the park and my son, so I like kind of got caught up in all that. And then I came back, I was like, oh, I got to finish more work. And I was like, no, I don't. Like, I don't need to push so hard. So anyway, so then I'm in a meeting with Stephen Bao. We're doing the Artist Way. And my wife comes in and she's like, did you leave the pool water on? How long has it? And I was like, oh no. Steve's like, do you have to go? I'm like, yes. And I went outside and the pool had been on. I am so embarrassed. We're in the height of the water crisis. The pool had been on for like 4 hours. And there was water coming off the top and it was like, it was this disaster. And it was just this one little oversight, honest mistake with huge consequences. Like our water bill, for one thing, is probably the least of it, right? We're in this huge drought right now. It's just so like I want to beat myself up over it. But the example of, I let myself go for that moment. It's okay, I need to get in the cold pool and just kind of like chill myself out. So I was trying to kind of get into that space, but I was just still like, no, I gotta, there's so much I gotta do. And, stuff's next week. I gotta be ready for next week. And, and because I wasn't present, because I didn't slow down, even that little bit of rushing through things led to an oversight that if this were a company that would have had major fiscal ramifications if money is your only metric, right? So from a business school perspective, the leaders who meditate have a superpower.
Yeah.
You can handle stress better. You can handle conflict with more grace. You can observe the room and find out, sometimes it's not about the amount of words you use. Sometimes it's about picking the right moment to use the same words in a shorter amount. And if you're present and you're clear, if you're clear mind, if you let that pond settle so you can see to the bottom, that's what that's talking about. And so you're talking about embodying the senses in this way that sort of reawakens us to something that humanity has been missing in the modern era. Because we wear shoes and live in buildings.
Well, and I think all of that keeps us traveling up to our head.
Yeah.
And then the head, poor head, thinks it's got to figure everything out. So, when that happens to me and I start getting really heady, funny, my surname is Hedine, that I lose my sense of humor. I lose my sense of pace. And I also lose my connection to the things that relax me, and I forget to be creative. I forget to perhaps journal. I forget to go walking. And I walk a lot because that's what helps me ground, and it fills my heart, and it just fills me with peace and happiness. But I forget all these things that are good for me because I get like these blinkers on, like a horse with blinkers. And it's all about decisions. And that's a horrible place for me. Because
I forget to breathe.
I know.
I find myself like someone will just like look over, grab my shoulder and squeeze it and say, "Hey, breathe." Like,
I know.
But I'm too much in my head. And ironically, you cut the oxygen off from your brain, and your brain is narrowing its focus, going into survival and making less holistic decisions. Very myopic thinking is occurring when you're...
Yeah, and everything accelerates. So it gets tighter. It's like coils that just are winding tighter and tighter and tighter. And from our physiology perspective, that's a horrible stress situation that creates a lot of heat. Every time I've ever gone to see a particular acupuncturist, every time he's like, your whole system's too hot. It's too hot. Relax. He's got this lovely voice. Relax, relax, relax your mind. And then there's this lovely soft, gentle water sounds playing in the room very quietly. And I have to quiet down to hear them. And then I leave and everything's kind of just chill and relaxed. It takes like half an hour. There are so many ways to do that, to do the relaxing. And for me, one of them is singing. That makes me feel good. But it's also, there's a physiology to that too, right? Because when you sing, you generate more activity in your bloodstream.
Yeah, part of my spiritual practice has been learning from energy aware people just simply to re-embody.
Yeah.
And so like right now I'm realizing, I need to become more aware of my feet because I've been sitting. So like I was sitting on my leg and now my feet, like I need to actually pretend that I can bring my consciousness into my feet and just sort of like, I have feet. Somehow like half the time I'm living up here, like
I know
from the top of my chest to like above my head just a little bit. Or sometimes if it's really bad, it's just above the eyebrows and only there. Yeah. And, it's a practice, and you can say what you want about metaphysical things, but even just the process of bringing your attention somewhere in your body creates a result, and it could be just as well all in your head, which I don't believe it is because I've worked with energy, but it actually creates a physiological impact. Just the process of like, I'll say, okay, everyone listening right now, bring your awareness into your hands. Feel your fingertips and your palms, wiggle your fingers. Okay, so now suddenly, your awareness is going all the way through your arms and into your fingers. And like, okay, so now put your hands out in front of you and bring that awareness in between your hands. And you can sort of imagine that you can see this ball of energy between your hands, and you can sort of like, so now move the energy up your arm, down your shoulder, and let's bring it down into your belly. And just breathe and feel. And then you can bring it down into your feet. And so wherever you focus your attention, that's where your energy is going. That's where your thought is going. And so in your sensory awareness, as you were putting it, now you're aware of your sensory body, that sensory side. So if you're a person who happens to live in the rational lot, it's beneficial to go into the sensory. And maybe if you're really, 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 really rational, that exercise I just did made no sense to you because you're not connected to your body. And you need to go outside, take your shoes off and stand in some grass.
Yeah.
And maybe walk around very slowly in some grass until it starts to prickle your toes. And then you'll be like, okay, I'm having an experience. It depends. I happen to be someone who's always been very highly sensitive. So we're just talking about this with another guest. I'm the person who, as a kid, had to get the socks without the seams in them because I would feel like the little seams would bother me. Everything's like hyper aware all the time. So imagine a hyper aware person that feels everything, also becoming stuck in my head. So now I'm really dysregulated because my body's screaming at me like, all the things it's too loud and too scratchy and too all these things. And I'm not listening to them. So I had a teacher who literally said to me, what is your body telling you? Answer the phone. So, if you're feeling a sensation or whatever, like pick up the phone. Okay, what is that telling me? My feet hurt. Oh yeah, I've been sitting. Or, I've been walking too much, or like, my back, I have pain in my back. Well, I'm actually kind of uncomfortable with this topic of conversation because I feel exposed. And so part of me wants to like pull in and everything's tight. It's literally that simple. And it's changed my life to practice awareness of embodiment and the interaction between the energies. Like when I get in a room with someone, I'm so sensitive that I feel that like dynamic as soon as they enter the room.
Yeah.
And that's just been my lived reality for a long time. And people might say, oh, that's pretend or that's made up or whatever. Okay, this is my lived experience. And so when I came in contact with people who were talking about energy and vibration and all those things, it finally gave a language to my lived experience. I'm like, oh, this is what this feels like being me. And more importantly, as someone who always notices lots of things like that, it actually gave me permission to say, oh, this thing I'm feeling, is this coming from inside me? Or is this coming from the experiencing of what's around me?
Exactly. These are very important questions.
And then I didn't feel crazy.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden I could go, oh, well, that person that just walked in, they have really crappy energy. And I don't like to be around that. And then, sure enough, like a minute later, they start arguing with the barista, and you're like, oh, wow, that's what? Oh, okay. And then you go, well, no wonder I didn't want to like interact with that. But no wonder I kind of wanted to leave, because there was about to be an altercation of some kind and there's conflict. And, I'm actually really triggered by conflict. So that's the part I get to work through. Like, maybe I should be a little less triggered by, someone arguing with the barista over whether there's enough foam, okay, whatever. Like, okay, not the end of the world. But when you're sensitive to everything and you're emotionally, biased like I am, everything feels like, and
yes. Yeah.
I love the way you describe that. I just major tangent, but that's actually
no, but I mean, what it brings up for me, you saying that, it just reminds me that we are an emergent phenomena, each of us. So there are two tenets in dynamic emergence. The first one is that nothing is fixed. So nothing, think about that. nothing is fixed. Everything is always somehow in motion. Even decomposition and decay is motion. And then the second is that energy waits to be noticed. And I mean, that's life, all of it. Just those two tenets really comment on how noticing what we're experiencing, how we're coming to something, coming toward a conversation or a moment, is going to affect what's possible next, what will happen next. So there's this interplay, as you mentioned earlier, an interplay of energies. And by the way, those energies include a lot more than what we reference as ourselves, because the energy includes ancestral energy. It includes our spiritual energy. If you believe in karma, it includes karma. If you don't believe in karma, it includes karma.
I've met some spiritual people who don't believe in karma too.
That's fine. But that's more of our mental stuff, right? What I choose to believe in is just what I choose to believe in. That has its own inbuilt logic. So it can only prove what it's willing to prove in a way. And I think we have to let our minds become a little more interesting to us, to let them tentacle out into other ways of knowing and being.
100%. And I don't want to delve into the analogy of quantum physics because people have started to resent the parallels that spiritually minded people are trying to draw between quantum physics, but you can talk about multidimensionality insofar as that there are other dimensions that are affecting us right now. For example, someone texted you this morning or yesterday in the recent history and said something that you still need to respond to. Okay, I just brought your mind to a whole other reality that's on a piece of plastic that has a bunch of electronics in it, that's working through a cellular network, and that person's not even in your physical proximity, but now there's probably some sort of emotion arising in your body. And it's affecting your lived reality in this moment. You're no longer present with the conversation. You are now in two places. That's multidimensionality.
Well, yeah, one of my favorites to watch, I used to watch all the Brian Greene videos.
I love them.
Yeah. I mean,
we'll put them in the show notes.
There are certain people, when they talk, something changes. And it's beyond the words. And I would say Alan Watts, Brian Greene, Joseph Campbell.
Yeah.
Obviously Bucky Fuller. Who else? There's something about the envelope of the voice itself that brings with it an acceptance of the largerness of life. And it's kind of the opposite of hubris. It's very, very much sitting at the feet of, can you imagine meeting, for instance, perhaps Buddha or Jesus as people and just being in their atmosphere? Oh, Sir George Trevelyan was another one. He was British. But yeah, some people, comes back to the poem. When we were born, we knew things. When we were born, we knew things. And my body knows, I forget how it was worded, but something about my body knows things from before its time.
Yes.
And so sometimes we can say stuff that doesn't make sense logically, but we understand that it's coming from a place of wisdom. We know it. We know it in
it's
the
resonant.
gestalt of who we are.
It feels right. It feels true. It feels absolutely 100%. Yeah. Well, in not only that, but you were talking about the system that supersedes all the other systems, and then all these systems affect each other and they're all connected. And that was what Stephen Bao and I were talking about when he was mentioning the holobiont, right? So, there's no there's no car that doesn't exist in a system of roads. It doesn't do its function without it, and there's no car without a system of gasoline or energy to put in the car. There's no transportation. And so it's the same thing. There's no humanity without a planet to live on or some sort of environment and as a species, we're not just existing in a planet, we're existing in a planet with other beings, other animals and
Yes.
insects and plants, and those are essential for our own thriving. If you got rid of all the trees, there would be no oxygen. And so these systems are within systems, and they're interconnected in ways that ripple, the butterfly effect or whatever. And it's so important to understand that you're not just you. It's
right. I'm a collective. You're a collective.
Yes.
Each of us is a collective on many, many levels and scales.
Yes, like I am, you talk about ancestry. I am the inherited knowledge of all my ancestors and what they left behind for me, and the genetics imprint that makes me predisposed to success and failure within my own organism, and those are things that if you just want to look at it from that level, but I'm also the inherited social beliefs of all my family systems and everything that's gotten passed down from about 3 to 4 generations. And people that I've never even met are influencing who I am as a human. Who I am as in the society, and how I see myself and how I act and behave, and what my fears are and what my inherited story is. Let's not even talk about, racial or transpersonal in that sense. Even if you're just looking at a family of, family tree, there are so many different nested systems within. And so therefore, not only am I not just me, but I'm also not just me because I cannot exist or thrive as a human without other friends and other people who are farming and making food, and also people in my community who I meet every day. And those people, I think you said in your interview, be very careful who your friends are, because those are the people who are going to become a part of your field.
Yeah.
That's why that's true, because we cannot help but react or respond to the people who are in our environment. It's so human.
Well, but also there's a service in that, because how we react is an indicator for us of where we're at, right? So you've got resonance and dissonance. So resonance, and within resonance, you've got consonance and dissonance.
Gotcha.
And really all that means is that we either like an experience we're having or we don't. Right.
So everything's resonating.
Everything's resonating.
You have two things. The moment you have two carriers, there's a resonance pattern.
Yeah.
And whether or not you think that's rock or like noise.
Yes, exactly. So we can learn about both ourselves and the other person based on what we're able to notice that we're experiencing. That's it. Yeah. So that's that second tenet, energy waits to be noticed. As we notice, so we transform. It's sort of an inevitable phenomena that the noticing creates motion, a transition of some kind.
I want to go back to that coffee shop analogy. So the patron walks up to the barista, and the barista was feeling particularly feisty that morning because something online got her really riled. Okay. And so she just didn't care. She wasn't going to put up with anything.
Okay.
And her karma was that one time she treated someone else wrong in a certain instance, and now she feels guilt over that. And so she's reactive in this online interaction because of how that plays into her personal field. And so she brings that to work. Well, the customer just had, let's say his mother's been sick forever, and he just found out about some problem at work with someone who just can't get something right. And he feels like over and over again, it's just like one thing after another. These things can't go right. He's coming into this coffee shop. He's really holding on to whatever grudge he has against the people at work who are, he's not noticing that energy and becoming introspective about it. So he comes into this coffee shop bristly and angry, but repressed, and just kind of like, I just need my coffee, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Young woman who is feeling incensed online, and man who's got the weight of the world of his shoulders and undealt with anger are meeting, and suddenly you've got a C sharp and you've got a C natural, and they're playing together. Actually, it's more like a D, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, So the moment they walk in the room, you hear this. So I'm there in the corner in the nice comfy chair going, oh, this chair is comfy. And I'm like, I'm still waking up and I love my coffee. And I hear come into the room. I'm like, what is that? That doesn't sound good. And so it's only a matter of time before, those two notes are that dissonance.
Yeah.
Those two people don't like the way they're feeling in contrast, or maybe one person really does.
They're trying to get it out of their system. I think
They're
an argument is simply that. It's
to
two
expend
people
the energy.
trying to expend that energy.
Oh my God. Could you believe that man? He just, I already put foam in it. How much foam can I put in it? And then there's just like expelling the energy.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's actually about that. It's not even about that online interaction. It's about the karma from the thing from childhood that you forgot about that she's playing out through this other thing. And now she's going to talk all day with her friends about the guy and the foam, freaking foam, and this guy maybe blew off some steam, felt really bad about it and came back to another interaction, realizing that, oh man, like maybe he felt embarrassed or guilt or whatever. Maybe he did, but whatever, it's now at the door and they've moved on. And now part of that tone has impacted me and my morning. And how do I respond to that? Do I go, wow, how interesting. Yeah, that was fascinating. Do I do the meme with Michael Jackson and the popcorn? Some people would just do have you seen that one where Michael Jackson's in the movie theater and he's got the Thriller jacket on. He's just like eating popcorn like, oh, this horror movie's going to be great. That's some people's reaction to dissonant energy is like, whoa, cool. I just saw something really funny. It really is super personal on how we respond to what's out there. Someone who like me is triggered by conflict is going to feel like the co-resonance of internally, oh man, this is unsafe. I feel threatened. I need to leave. I don't know why, but I can't calm down. And maybe it wasn't even like no fists were going to fly, it's just words. And they maybe, even if the other people feel better now, because they, like you said, sometimes that energy just needs a place to go. That's why all kinds of music has its place. Sometimes you just got to listen to loud, aggressive metal music to just like, okay.
Yeah.
All right. There's other times where that's not helpful, but yeah, like I really do think that that's just a quick break. If you want to subscribe to our mailing list and keep in touch, you can join us on Substack, languageofcreativity.substack.com. Now back to the language of creativity. Anyway, but yeah, co-resonance.
So
wow, I got worked up just giving you that example.
I know. So I've got two questions for you. The first one is, what was it that made you feel like you wanted to play that small segment at the very beginning? So that's a question.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What was it about that was speaking to you, that was touching something in your awareness or in your senses? And then the other is our conversation. I'm thinking of the fact that this podcast is called The Language of Creativity. And I'm wondering how to really open the door on that aspect of our having a conversation. Like, what is it about us two talking together that could contribute to our understanding of the language of creativity?
I love that question because, first of all, you're a creativity teacher, so that's amazing. I feel like a lot of us who get into creativity are simply trying to vent that frustration in some way. Like when I got into music, it was because I had feelings that I couldn't express in words. So getting on a piano made me play with the tension between these notes. And that's what actually helped me to feel like there was some sort of release or catharsis. So originally for me, that was what it was. And then the idea of creativity really was the thing that tied together all these different facets of myself that I knew I was kind of multifaceted and loved talking with these interesting conversations. And what I realized was that creativity can be applied to anyone or anything. Yeah. And that as soon as I resonated with the identification of I am a creative, suddenly it wasn't hard to, I didn't have to say, well, I'm a musician or I'm a producer or I'm a, I'm a thinker, all these things. It's like that resonated with me and with everything that I wanted to share and everything that I think about. Particularly when I heard your, The Mountains Breathe, I was listening through the links that you had sent me and I was driving, and I started at the beginning, and it just struck me that moment where the wind starts and you start to speak in that way that you said, it doesn't have to make sense. It just makes sense. It just feels true. And I was like, this is the impartation that I want to give to the audience. I think to start from this place of here's this topic that we may not understand of sound and healing and energy. But let's approach it from a way where we can sort of like pick up the book from the middle. That's one of my favorite things to do. I pick up books in the middle and I just go, oh, that, like, and I don't know how I turn to the page I do, but that's just something really interesting that I needed to know. And I can tell whether I like the book or not by starting just wherever it feels right. And
that's how I decide on films. So I'll listen to the soundtrack. If I'm starting to watch a film, I'll listen to the soundtrack, and within seconds, I know the caliber of the film and whether or not I'm going to enjoy it or want to sit through it even.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense of like in the poem that you read, there's a sense of scratching at the notes or the piano of the overtones that are the foundation of some of the deeper things that you're about and that you would talk about. Like you mentioned social sustainability and things like that. Yeah. Without even going into them, we're talking about all the underpinnings of them. And therefore, we're able to talk about them in a way that isn't going to create that deadlock. That's a really important thing to me, is like sometimes you just have to you have to acknowledge the energy. And, the man doesn't mean to yell at the barista for the foam. Like that's not his intent. That's just what happened. That's just the result of all of the things that were going on.
Moments.
Yeah. And so as humanity, most of us don't mean to kill the planet. Most of us don't mean, like we would say, if you polled 100 people, 95 of them would say, yeah, we should get off fossil fuels because it's destroying the earth. But why does that not translate into action? It's because there's so many other systems beyond the personal that are collectively affecting the outcome. Yeah. And so we need to get honest about the causes and not try and vilify people who are acting out of an unconscious space, because they're not going to suddenly become conscious of something just because someone's mad at them. That's going to make them go more unconscious. That's going to make them go into like, well, I got to defend myself. And did you believe what they said? And let's think of ways to make them wrong. That's human nature. So I think for me, from a systems perspective, it's about, I mentioned this with Katie McBratney, is the inner architecture when you're emerging as an artist. And this is why it's fun to go through the Artist's Way again. It's actually a soul growth process. And what I realized was that creativity and art and whatever it is that we are emerging as, becoming as individual humans, it's our ability to start to express unique emergences of our own beingness. And that's things like art that actually help us to show that off in an objective, like fixed, tangible way that someone else can see and perceive. So when you make those paintings of the energy, I'll put, if I can ask for your permission to use it, I'll put one of them in the show notes. This is the emotion implied in this two-dimensional thing with color and shapes. It's implying motion. It's also helping me to understand your perception. And so I think most artists are speaking a language where they're in whatever medium they're trying to use, a language to help express something that's emerging from internal. So if I am a person who's on the earth going through a life experience that is influenced by ancestry and karma and my society, and how cool, right? Because I get to have an experience. I get to actually, it's like, Shakespeare said, all the world is a stage and we're all the players. Today I get to be the chorus, and, tomorrow I get to be Iago. And then the next day I get to be Othello. And then I get to see what it's like to be Desdemona. And in a sense, whether or not you believe in past lives, parallel lives. I mean, that's like what we're all doing collectively. We're all experiencing being in, I've been the guy at the counter with the foam, and I've been the gal with the cell phone and the, dead end job. I've been both of those people. And so for me to expand my awareness of compassion by understanding that, like, okay, so what I get to look at is, because I only have agency over me, I get to look at my response to that whole interchange. And, the first step for me was giving myself permission when something was about to go down to go, okay, that's real. And I get to go if I want to. Like, it is safer for me to listen to that part of myself. Yeah. And then as I mature and I deal with some of that, like, triggers and my own hurts and traumas and those things, then that's when I can start to gain some mastery over my ability to stay in that situation and maybe become a positive catalyst for the energy. A minor second can sound really cool with a fifth.
I love the minor intervals.
Yeah. If you suddenly add the right jazz around something, it could actually be really cool. And it could turn out to be this really great moment. And you wouldn't know that if you were just in that mode of, I don't like this, dissonance. And ultimately that I don't like this might turn into that changed my life. That was the defining moment that had to happen. And so I think that's what it is for me. And I think that's why I was really excited to talk to you, because sound healing is one of the modalities that I have experienced in order to go on my own healing journey of reconnecting with myself, my body, my own perceptiveness about these energy interplays and patterns and those things. And it's something that I love to explore a little bit more with you. Let's talk about The Mountains Breathe for a minute. Can you, where was that recorded?
So a lot of all the photography is from Scotland, and the wind is from Scotland. Some of the water is from Scotland. And some of the islands north of Scotland, still Scotland, and then also west of Scotland. And I was staying up in Scotland for like 4 months or 5 months, and in fact was there that long because COVID started during that time. So I kind of got situated at Findhorn for a couple of months. I left the Orkney Islands very quickly. I'd been on them for like a month and a half or something. But then everything was going to shut down. So I took the last ferry the next day after hearing that, and went onto the mainland. And there I was able to be outdoors a lot because Findhorn, the community, is situated right by the water. And there are ponies and walks and stuff, and people being social. It was a really extraordinary place to be able to be during that time. And no one really knew what we were doing yet. So mask mandates weren't in place yet. So it was just kind of this weird
nobody
sort
knew
of suspended reality.
Yeah, nobody knew how contagious the virus was or how it spread or what preventive measures worked.
But that triadic chord of the vocals, that's something that I actually recorded kind of by accident years earlier. There are two things in there that are from earlier. That chord is one, such a beautiful chord. It's so haunting. And I did that when I was doing final edits on a previous album called Sacred Water, which was mostly water recordings in the UK, and then me doing vocals in and out of that. Water and a little bit of wind. It's hard to record wind.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was one. And I knew when I recreated it, it's like I couldn't put it into Sacred Water because I was really finished with it. And it's like, no, this has to wait. And so that got pulled in years later. And then the other was the performance of a basically, it was a song called it's called Mountains. And he goes, I am the mountains, you are the breeze. I am the forest, you are the trees. I see you running all around me, trying to get in. I feel your fingers on my that you cannot enter in. And it goes through all these different elements, but it's basically
such a beautiful voice.
Thank you. And it's just I remember where I was when that song came through. I was driving towards Ocean Beach in San Francisco alongside the park. And I was hearing these lyrics. And so I pulled over and just recorded them on my phone. And it was just this whole piece, and it was the earth. A lot of what I sing is elemental, and it's the earth coming through me. And I just I grant permission, to be that accomplice in that process, because I am the earth. Just and anyone is able to say that,
You're a child of the earth.
I am the earth.
You come from the earth.
Yeah, I come from the earth. I am the earth. I return to the earth. So all of me is interwoven as planet, experiencing through my collaboration, my awareness of that. So, human is just an aspect of earth, as is crow, as is wind, as are lizards or trees or dogs or any of the species, the billions of species that exist. We are kind of a cacophony of symphony, moving and interacting and weaving. And that on one level is energy, but on another level it's sound and it's vibration and it's influence. And we are so interwoven that everything does affect everything. And you really cannot talk about that without mentioning quantum reality. I don't care if that upsets somebody. It's just really stupid to try to talk about it. If you want to talk about it through the language of science, you have to talk about quantum physics.
Yeah.
There's no other way. And things like we can even reflect on our physiology and our emotional selves through quantum terminology, such as entanglement.
Yeah.
So healing can't happen. Well, healing is indicated, the need for healing is indicated by entanglement. So if I'm running a story over and over and over and heating up my system, there is a form of entanglement. And that is why it doesn't matter if someone's alive or dead. If you have unfinished business, that entanglement crosses time and space. It is not dependent on time. It's experienced in space. Yeah. And so by unlocking or at least noticing that entanglement and finding out, what do I need? What did I need then? What do I need now? What needs to be heard and seen? That's second tenet. Nothing, energy waits to be noticed. By doing that, things can release themselves. We don't force reconciliation and healing. We allow it by becoming present to what is there to be noticed. So it's a slightly different thing. I don't know if I can say it again. I mean, it comes out of my mouth and, it's recorded, so it's there. But our presence, we talk about presence, but we don't really explain it. And I think presence is, although it's a way of being, presence is it's an act of noticing. So by noticing my planetness, by noticing how my heart feels when it aches and cries for behaviors that deny and defy life. That's my evidence of my interconnectedness. That's my evidence of being that which is being harmed as well as that who is doing the harm sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I believe you said that reconciliation is not something we make happen. It's something that you must allow. Yes.
Yes. So for years, I was angry with my father and I was angry with my mother for different reasons. And people, especially with my father, because he was still alive, people would say, oh, you've just got to forgive him. And I'm like, no, I can't. And it took me a long, long time. And that was my journey, to understand the dynamics of relationship. And in the end, in that particular instance, I finally understood that the forgiveness, so I'm just more about entanglement, of course, But then I actually understood that forgiveness is, and lots of humans confuse this. We think that if we forgive something, that we are condoning it or saying it was okay. And in fact, the forgiveness piece is more about coming to terms. Now, how do I want to put this? It releases us. So when I forgave my father, I also had to forgive myself, because there are two people there.
Yeah.
And the part of oneself that feels that we let down by allowing something to happen, even though that's not necessarily what we were doing, but we were part of something.
Yeah.
Right. There's always a mutuality because everything is interdependent, interrelational.
Yeah.
So the part of us that's present at something that needs to be heard, loved, witnessed, cherished, really, and perhaps given the notice that we weren't being given at the time. So sometimes, as bizarre as it sounds, we have to forgive ourselves for having had needs.
Right.
Right? Because if the needs weren't met, then we can be angry with ourselves for having the needs because it caused us suffering.
Even if we're forgiving ourselves for something that we couldn't not need, you still have to, if there's a part of you that's angry with yourself, that is the forgiveness. Yeah.
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 So, and then of course, if when it comes to really definable things like rape or incest or some kind of trackable abuse, that kind of forgiveness is another whole scene too, because the body has different things that run its experiencing, you know, and so there can be some very confusing experiences around some of that because of the pleasure that can occur despite the confusion, or because of this idea that if something happened to us, we must have allowed it.
Right.
You know, and so it's so complicated. It's so complicated to have to navigate these sort of riptides of reality.
That's a good way to put it. Riptides. Yeah, you get pulled down a stream and it's not your fault that you're in the riptide, but it's your life sustaining responsibility to know how to swim sideways out of the riptide. Otherwise, someone's going to have to come save you. And hopefully that person is there. And it's like, it's not your fault that you're in the riptide. Or maybe you could have avoided the riptide, or you could sit there and blame yourself all day.
If you had known.
But you didn't, and you're in it.
Right.
And so here we go. Let's swim out of the riptide.
Yeah, and that's a mad panic thing. Like the minute you're in a riptide, like I've been in riptides before I knew what they were. And it's terrifying. Because you really don't know how to get out. Yeah, you don't know how to get out. Yeah. And the more you try, the more tired you become.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's terrifying, you know. So if you imagine the riptide experience in other scenarios when you're much younger, maybe you don't have anyone to reach out to, maybe you don't know you need to, that confusion can really suppress the experience and expression of joy because you're busy. You're occupied, your system is occupied with managing an energy system that's really been imposed upon. And that's the kind of thing that we look at, by the way, again, in dynamic emergence, like some of our earlier childhood experiences from the perspective of energy. The whole thing is a study of energy because I'm energy having a human experience as well as consciousness having a human experience, as well as planet, having a human experience. I'm so many things.
As well as 80 billion cells having a human experience.
80 billion cells having a human experience.
Some of them alive, some of them dead. Yeah. Like my hair and my fingernails, right? You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, in a moment, I'd like for you to demonstrate sound healing techniques. We can play along at home. I would love for you to focus the intention on forgiveness.
Yeah. Okay. So you'd like me to sing a little and play?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And walk the audience at home through this, because a
I
lot of
will.
people have never done this and they don't know what to expect. It always,
Sure.
you know, from Daniel Tiger, it's first we're going to talk about what we're going to do before we do it. So if it's new, we feel a sense of safety around it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me that there's time and space to set a context, a container. So as let me just give a tiny bit of information. I have a really, really full of love relationship to music. And because of that, I then became fascinated so long ago in the nature of sound itself. And so I've taught courses on the nature of sound and the sounds of nature, and how nature and sound show up in plant experiences. And I'm not talking about psychedelics, I'm talking about the plant itself having experiences and how they generate sound. And that all of life, all the species, all the interconnectedness, there's a whole eco sound system that is life. So I was a singer-songwriter for many years, and then I became a sound healer. And the distinction for me, because there is healing in the songs that
Yes.
I would do.
Oh, no doubt.
Yeah, but the sound element is where I'm not generating a narrative in the form of a story with words.
Oh, okay.
So it's purely the expression and the generating of sound itself. And so I do that with my voice. And I typically do it with my shruti. The shruti it sounds a little like bagpipes or the accordion, depending on or the hurdy-gurdy, I suppose, but it's a little softer.
We had a Del Ruba on Lobate Scarp. That's what you hear between tracks 1 and 2.
Oh, cool. So, so I'm just going to play the shruti and sing a little bit. And I'm not really going to tell you what you'll experience internally, but externally, you'll just hear that. You'll hear voice and the sound of the shruti accompanying me. And I invite you to stop what you're doing. Don't be driving. You know what I mean? Be safe. And I'll just give you some sound and we'll see what happens. Now, the thing to do is just feel yourself in the space. Notice yourself as energy with no boundaries, no separation, fully connected, part of, belonging. No time, just space. There is room for you as you are, in all your potential. All of you that awaits to be noticed is available to you right now. There's no separation. You are the bees. You are the wind. You are the trees. You are the ants, the soil, the nutrients, the chemistry, the stars. Everything, absolutely everything. You are the violence. You are the peace.
Yeah.
You are in the flow. The frequencies. You have an impact. You matter. And you have the power to become now. Just with the magic of your mind and body.
That was incredible. That really opened me up. You are important. You matter. And you have the right to be here. You are creative, and there is something emerging from you that you get to bring to all of this.
Yeah. And our healing is part of that journey. It's not instead of, it's
100%.
part of the journey. Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that happened is a part of who you are becoming. And the healing from what happened is a part of who you're becoming. You often talk about healers are people who have experienced the wounds in such a way that we care about the healing, and we've learned how to do the healing, and we're able to share the healing. The reason that we want to bring healing is because that healing was needed somehow in us as well.
I'm just realizing that artists and healers have a lot in common. I haven't really thought about it like that before, because I know artists, one of the things that kind of separates us, having said that we're not separate, but that's unique. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Something we practice actively is going into unknown spaces, unknown territory, and listening, and then generating, co-creating. And healers do the same thing. So we travel into unknown zones, what I call the numinous.
Yeah.
Right. And when we do that, by doing that, we are kind of the forerunners, really. We hold open the door. We look for the door.
Yes.
Right. And then we travel through it before anyone's made a map.
Yeah. The explorers.
Yeah.
Of the unconscious terrains.
And the multidimensionality.
Yeah.
Right. So
much.
There's human consciousness, there's planetary consciousness, there's infinite consciousness.
A story is a universe. The Harry Potter universe exists and it impacts reality, even if it's fiction.
Yeah.
And this is what artists have talked about for generations, of letting these stories and these other realities influence our lives, which they do because we live our stories. And it's so true that the artists in society are the forerunners. They're looking ahead. They're looking to where the change is going. They're looking at where the explosion points are, they're in the middle of, there's a scene, you're going to write about it. You're going to, maybe it's the AIDS scene in the 80s and people, is like this thing that the rest of the world doesn't know about, but you write music about your experience and your friend's experience and what's going on and the pressure of that situation, and then that art goes out into the pop world and suddenly that's like the forerunner for the awareness of the entire movement and what's going on in the world. And no human, because we are paradoxically in that experience of the living, as an individual, in the collective, no one human can experience consciously it all at once. There are parts of the world I know nothing about, but someone can write a song from that part of the world and I can feel the vibration of it and that experience and the ethos of it before I even understand the lyric, before I even educate myself on what that song was about. I didn't know what Bloody Sunday was about. And you too, know that I had to go look that up, but the emotion, the feeling is translatable, and it created movement in the society. And that was a forerunner as expressing that even the forgiveness and the catharsis, or the need for forgiveness, the need for moving on, the tension of the not getting along and all the things that were needing change, the call for change, that is a forerunner as well. Yeah. And so as artists, we matter. That's the point. Yeah. As artists, we matter. And if you look at if you're just sitting in the burning building, counting money, going, I'm an artist who's not making money, and so none of it matters. Then maybe you should be singing We Didn't Start the Fire. But I think that's so a part of the lived experience as an artist, is that feeling of like, no one's listening. And that's why we have to share the art, because it completes the circle. For me as an artist, that's really, really important. Otherwise, that energy doesn't really get to travel. It doesn't get to land inside somebody else somehow. Mm-hmm. So that just, to me, I don't know if that should be or is true for every artist, but for me, it's important because I'm a communicator. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a fulfillment in that feels important and right. A lot of times as forerunners, the ideas that you're working on the whole world's not quite ready for them yet. So that doesn't mean you should stop. That means you should continue to incubate and communify in your own spaces that movement and those ideas, and plant the seeds. And then sometimes, a lot of artists don't see the result of their work for years later, but now we're all singing Bob Dylan like it's canon. Well, this was absolutely wonderful, Clare. Thank you so much for joining us on the Language of Creativity podcast. Do you have any links to share? Yes. And if you're on social media, can you let people know where to find you? Absolutely. So firstly, it's been really a privilege to hang out with you and to chat and explore all these different things. So thank you for inviting me. And if you're listening, thank you for listening to the two of us meander through all these subjects. So my name is my website. So it's clarehedin.com, Clarehedin.com.
dynamicemergence.com. But there's also dynamicemergence.net. So there are two websites. People can they can do a search on YouTube, everywhere really, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and
they can find your new album.
Oh gosh, thank you for reminding me to
Grief and Praise.
Grief and Praise is a newly released, late July, newly released album, Grief and Praise, and it's a live sound healing, and it kind of has 3 parts, 3 journeys in it. And I'd love for you to buy it, listen to it, take the journey. Again, it's not one you can multitask with if you really want to travel with it to other realms. So get good headphones or speakers and just kind of really just have an experience with it. Yeah, and that's on the Clare Hedin site, as is lots of other music, actually.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of myself and my journey as an experience as well, and for making the concept so clear about energy. And this is just the confluence of various voices singing together. They make a chord. And I would love to chat with you again.
I would too, yes. I think we should do this more often.
Yes, I think we should make this a thing.
Yeah.
So, good.
I'm into it.
Thanks for being my guest. You can check out the Language of Creativity podcast wherever you get your podcast. Please review us if you like this episode. Join us on Substack and YouTube and share it with your friends. We'll catch you next time on the Language of Creativity podcast.